Hey, everybody, thanks so much for watching another episode of the Cooligans today. We got a nice interview,
It's episode 2, and we got our first guest.
Wow, already?
Look at this. Everybody knocking on our door.
Okay, I hope it's not a creditor. You know, okay?
We got Grant Wahl.
Wow.
Okay.
Right to the top of the heap.
That's right. After just amazing journalist, Sports Illustrated, been everywhere. You
The guy's writing books? I don't even read books, and he's writing books.
So all this and more today on the
Cooligans!
Look at
Yeah,
this.
baby! Come on, huh?
Look at this. 2 episodes.
Wow.
Didn't think we would make it, I'll be
That's
honest.
right. Well, we had to duct tape some of the execs to some chairs to get this one to go.
You
But
know
don't
what?
worry about it.
It just shows ambition.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. I mean, I'm trying. You know?
Okay, this is what all my elementary school teachers wanted. What they wanted to see from me then.
I'm trying to make my mother. I'm trying to make my wife. I'm trying to make my parole officer. All of them proud of me. You know what I mean?
Okay.
How do we get them all in one room?
Yes, I always love those. Those birthday cards your parole officer sends you. It's really beautiful.
Oh, okay, well, the person we're interviewing thinks I have a parole officer now. Okay, and I do not. But what I do have is the honor of bringing this gentleman on our podcast/television show.
That's right.
Right? I mean, guys, you know him. You mentioned SI. You know him from books he's written. You know him from World Cup coverage. You know him from soccer. If you follow soccer in America, you know who this person is.
Yeah, you can't avoid him.
No, not at all. Sometimes you're watching something, he's not even on. He creeps up in the background. You know what I mean?
He's in the lower
He's
third.
like, hey, your boy's still around. Ladies and gentlemen, unless you're driving.
Okay.
Why are you watching television if you're driving? Put your hands together for the one, the only, Grant Wahl.
There.
Wow.
Great to be here, guys. Thank you so much
Look,
for
we shook
having me.
hands. He's real. It's not CGI.
Grant, thank you so much for joining us on our first show. You're the first guest on our show.
This feels historic, so thanks
it
for
is.
having me.
This is 100% historic. You should be honored, to be honest.
Okay. I can't wait for the hit piece from Grant Wahl about the Cooligans coming soon.
They smell exactly like you think. Disgusting.
All right, Grant. Look, a lot of people know you for your amazing soccer coverage for years. You've been covering American soccer for a long time. You're one of these people that I look to, like the OGs when it comes.
Say it. I'm old.
No, not at all. We thought it, but we didn't say it.
No, you know what? To be honest, I can't even tell your age. I don't know what age you are. You could be 14 or
I
45.
started shaving my head in 2001.
Okay.
And the benefit of doing this is you never age. They
don't.
did that 10-year challenge on social media earlier this year, and I posted from 10 years ago and this year, and it looked the same.
Okay,
Everyone's like, you're wearing the same shirt even in this photo. It's the same photo.
Other than that, yeah.
Well, now, I know your backstory is you started covering a college team that Bob Bradley was in charge of, correct?
So way back in 1992, as a freshman at Princeton, I covered Bob Bradley's team for the Daily Princetonian, the student newspaper.
Okay.
And
Right.
so
Hard hitting.
Bob would tell you I have been asking him stupid questions for 27 years.
Okay. And he also said you stole his look.
Yeah.
By the way, that guy is jacked these days. Have you
Oh,
seen
yeah. Oh, no,
how
no.
much time he must spend in the gym? It's incredible.
It's the only way he gets the aggression out. That man hasn't smiled since you asked him that question in 1992.
So you were you were covering college soccer. So how
How did you transition to American soccer?
I mean, it's funny because back in those days, I was covering Bob's college team, and neither one of us would have predicted that 27 years later, he would be doing what he's doing, having coached the U.S. in a World Cup as well.
Yeah.
Or that I'd be doing what I'm doing and have been doing for 23 years at Sports
Telling
Illustrated.
him he sucks at coaching. Yes.
And you know what, though? I will say this. It's easy to joke about Bob. Like, he is an incredible individual and a guy who really did a lot to help me sort of as a student get into soccer. He helped connect me to Boca Juniors for a college project back in the day in Argentina and did a lot of things, not knowing that I would ever cover him or be, in this position today. I went to cover him after so many years covering him in U.S. soccer when he was the Egypt coach. Did a big story on Bob for Sports Illustrated, and I think that was the moment where he kind of changed. I don't know if he would admit it, but I think he became almost sort of like a world citizen during those days when he was the Egypt coach, going through so much in that country and getting them on the verge of qualifying for a World Cup. It was really impressive, I thought.
Yeah, this is why I like hearing you speak, right? Because I call you an OG, but it's also you have a lot. There must be a wealth of stories, of experiences.
Just the stuff you can't tell must be amazing.
I mean, here's another example. Back in the day, a player for Bob's Princeton team was Jesse Marsch. So Jesse was in my year in college, and he and I ended up in the student infirmary for 3 days together. When I got food poisoning, he had something, and we got to know each other really well, kind of away from the soccer field. And it's funny how early relationships that you make, you then can have for many, many years later. I mean, I'm literally interviewing Jesse this week as he's about to become the first American coach in UEFA Champions League for Red Bull Salzburg. And it's pretty incredible just sort of the way that works.
Yeah, I love how Grant didn't break HIPAA compliance by saying what Jesse Marsch had.
Yeah. He's like, if you want to know. They still call it the Jesse Marsch flu. I'm not going to tell you what it is. A couple of warts here and there. You know? It's fine when you're not in an outbreak.
Oh my God. I love we can make
Grant's like, and we got a second paragraph for the hit piece. So you've recently written a book, but one of the things that stands out to me the most is the Beckham Experiment.
Thanks.
So talk a little bit about sort of the fallout from that, because as fans, we got to see a lot. Landon Donovan was asked a bunch of questions. Bruce Arena was asked a bunch of questions. A lot of stuff had been sort of came out because of that book. What was it for you when you put that out? Did you see any backlash from that? Did you think that was going to affect your career moving forward?
I mean, in the end, it affected my career in a really positive way. It helped me become a full-time soccer writer, because I didn't become a full-time soccer writer until 2009, when Sports Illustrated was like, oh, you can actually cover soccer full-time, not just basketball, with soccer on the side like you've been doing. Now, the book, the idea for it was to follow David Beckham in his first 2 years with the LA Galaxy. And so that's what I did. What I didn't realize was that they were going to be horrible the first 2 years, because I thought they'd be pretty good. And eventually they were pretty good, winning championships. But I got deeper inside that Galaxy team than I've ever gotten inside any team that I've ever covered, just because I was around them for so long. And Landon in particular, but also Alexi Lalas, if you remember, was the GM of that team before he got fired. And Ruud Gullit was the coach, and he and Alexi got fired the same day. And there was so much turmoil inside that team. And then Beckham's best friend became like the guy who ran the team. And it was just crazy. And the thing about it was that because I wasn't writing that week for Sports Illustrated, a lot of my interviews with players inside the Galaxy, including Donovan, were like, is this for Sports Illustrated or for your book? And because it was for the book and it wasn't going to come out for many more months, it was almost like they felt a willingness to share more about what was really happening inside the team. Which was interesting for me, because it's not like that meant it was off the record. It just means it's on the record, but later.
Exactly.
And when the book came out, there was a lot of attention, because here you had Beckham back in the first part of 2009, had been on loan with AC Milan, was trying to kind of get out of the Galaxy. And now he's being called out by Landon Donovan and Alexi Lalas and all these American guys in this book. And it really created quite a situation where Beckham, who I still don't think has read the whole book or much of it, I don't know. I think he was told not to like it. I'd had a good relationship with him. I had done 2 cover stories on him for Sports Illustrated back in 2003 and 2007. And he had always seemed like a pretty regular guy, all things considered.
Yeah, well, we got more with Grant right after this. So, I mean, clearly that was a little rough. Do you think it's going to affect anything now?
I'm curious, actually, now that Miami's coming into MLS next year, will Beckham still kind of hold a grudge this many years later? But one thing I've always said to his people is that I think he's done a tremendous amount for the sport here. And if he has any issues, he should have issues with the people who spoke out in the book.
Oh, yeah, nice. You're like, not me. I wrote only what they said. I think you just won't get media passes for Miami games. That's all.
Beckham never forgets, you know?
Grant Wall walks in and be like, oh, can I get a pass for Fort Lauderdale Club de Football? Is that possible?
I'm actually curious because, we haven't been in like this soccer space for very long, and us being comedians sometimes can rub people the wrong way. Where like
You don't say.
well, I think sometimes it could be like, well, are you gonna mock the sport, especially American soccer? I think MLS and U.S. soccer get a little protective of the whole kind of establishment. And as a young journalist, as a upstart, when you were kind of trying to navigate that space, I'm sure you've kind of experienced, especially seeing the growth of American soccer, and maybe some more boundaries and maybe some walls and things like that. How have you kind of figured out a way to be kind of like critical of what's been going on, and also maintain the access that your job requires?
How do we talk shit and still get credit?
I mean, it's a great question. I guess what I would say is I think everyone should have a sense of humor about themselves. So if the people you're covering don't have a sense of humor about jokes, that's on them.
Sure.
And that's less also about criticism, I think, to humor. Like if U.S. soccer makes a bad hire or deserves criticism in some way, I think I've been doing this for over 2 decades. I think there's a respect that you do it in ways that don't just suggest you're trying to burn bridges every other week, or this is the only way you approach
You hear that, Alexis?
Because just this week, I wrote a critical column after the U.S. got destroyed by Mexico 3-0. Wrote another pretty critical piece on U.S. soccer, and the CEO, Dan Flynn, is leaving next week. And I really do feel strongly that they need to go outside of U.S. soccer to hire his replacement, because U.S. soccer is, to me, this deeply conservative organization that needs some new blood, and I really don't want to see the men's national team coach's brother become the boss of his boss. I think that's kind of bad.
Yeah.
And so that deserves criticism, and I think as long as you don't get personal about it, you're going to be fine.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's
okay. You handle that then.
Well, it's, you know what, I would say, like, it's difficult, I guess, to distinguish, like, and separate. I'm a fan today. I'm a journalist tomorrow. I'm a comedian.
We're never journalists.
You know what I mean?
Maybe a pundit. We're certainly not journalists. Like, we would never call ourselves that. But we do get to cover the game, and we get to cover the game from this position of saying, like, well, here's what we think. And a lot of times what we think, we're always going for the comedic angle. And I don't know that everyone always either notices that. Maybe it's our bad not doing a good job of it. But sometimes we'll say something and people are like, oh, that's a little mean. And we're like, well, yeah, it's a joke. That's kind of the point.
And I get it. And I think, like, there's a lot of people coming from different approaches to covering the sport. And so I like having that variety out there. I like the perspective that you guys bring, because it's kind of different compared to a lot of the other discussion we see.
Yeah. One of my favorite things is, like, people's reaction when they find out that we're comedians covering American soccer. They're like, oh, okay. They're like, what do you think we're going to do? Pop out from behind a wall during your conference? I'm like, I don't know what the reaction's like. Oh, I don't know. And I'm like, don't you think we kind of made it? Like, the sport's kind of made it when comedians want to talk about it, Yeah.
I do think that. And I think also it's a sign of the growth, right? I mean, like, we didn't see guys like you coming around in the mid-1990s because there wasn't a lot going on with U.S. soccer back in the day.
They don't allow that.
They don't allow toddlers walking around.
Well, this kid's got bits in his shorts. He pooped. So,
but I was gonna say, like, but even seeing that growth and from covering the sport, and for as long as you have, the fact that MLS is where it currently is, well, how does it make you feel now? Because I remember when we spoke to Kevin Payne. You know Kevin Payne?
Not a comedian.
Not a comedian, no.
Does not get the joke.
Complete opposite, probably. Yeah. Right? But Kevin Payne, he works current for U.S. club soccer, if I'm not mistaken. And but talking to him about, like, helping create MLS and then keeping it afloat, there is this old guard of, like, hey, we brought it, we saved it.
Yeah.
I don't care about all these new teams. All these new fans that start following it.
It's like, shut up, sit down, and listen to us. We've been here.
Well, we're, like, kind of quoting him. It's literally what he told us on the show.
Paraphrasing, but not really.
And then he said, quote, get off my lawn.
Yeah. He basically, if we let him talk for 5 minutes, he would have said it. He was like, these new fans, they don't even know what they're talking about. I was here in '92.
You know, when I think of you, I don't think of you as like a fuddy-duddy that's like frustrated.
That's good. Thanks.
Yeah. No, but you've been
You're like the stepdad with cool shoes. You're like, yeah, he kind of gets it. Yeah.
Are those Reeboks?
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, got the throwback joints on.
But you've been in both worlds where you've had to cover those people that were kind of more conservative about the league, and then now dealing with more owners that are like, hey, let's get rid of the salary cap. Let's really see where this can go. How does it kind of feel having seen both of those sides?
I mean, I got Sports Illustrated in '96, which was the first year of MLS, and so I have seen it all in a sense.
Yes.
And we actually did do a really neat sort of oral history on the first year of MLS, me and Brian Strauss a couple of years ago. And there was, if those guys are like the serious types, there was all kinds of craziness that happened in the first parts of MLS. Yeah. So like, remember that. But I never would have said it was inevitable that MLS would get to the point where it is now. You know, I wanted to cover soccer full time, not because I thought it was going to become this huge sport in America, but because I liked it. And the fact that it's gotten to this point in America I'm kind of tickled by that in a really positive way. And we'll see where it goes from here. What I would say, though, is that the problem with MLS isn't the new teams. The issue that they got to deal with is the original teams.
Yeah.
And a lot of those cities like Denver, like Dallas, even Columbus still to an extent. And you know, to this point, we've only really seen Kansas City among the original teams turn things around. Sure. And I'm from Kansas City. It was a wasteland there for a long time. Then they got new ownership, built that stadium, hired Peter Vermees, and put together a championship team. Not this season, but you know, that's a place that now soccer's a really big deal in Kansas City. MLS is a really big deal. So I'd like to see that happen with other original teams. And I think that's a bigger challenge than any of these expansion markets.
Wow, don't go anywhere. We got more with Grant Wahl when we come back. We are interviewing Grant Wahl, author of the Masters of Modern Soccer, Sports Illustrated's own Grant Wahl. You were talking about the old guard. It seems like this CBA coming up, right? They've already started preparing for it. They all posted that photo. We are MLSPA. It seems like this might be the turning point. At least the fans are hoping that this becomes a big turning point. Feels like a lot of missed opportunities with the last CBA for the players. They left a lot of money on the table, right? TAM comes out all of a sudden, right? A bunch of agreements come out all of a sudden afterwards. What do you think is going to happen with this one? Do you think the fans are going to get what they want? Do you think the players are going to get what they want?
I'd like to see the players get some gains. I mean, like, it really hit me actually in my first book back in '07, just how the rank and file player in MLS has to fight so much stuff. Because here you had David Beckham making $50 million a year, including endorsements, playing next to Alan Gordon, who was also a character in my book, a wonderful character, really funny guy, who was making like $17,000 a year at the time, had to live with two of his teammates, had to coach on the side. And you really felt what the players had to go through. And so the minimum wage has gone up since then, so that's good. But it's still tough being a lower level MLS player. And so I'd like to see those gains being made in the minimum wage. When you compare it to other sports leagues, it's nowhere close. And also, you know, I've traveled with these guys on commercial flights. And I just feel badly sometimes when you have to make a connection to fly across the country to Vancouver or something, and you're in a middle seat and coach. And like, I can do that because I'm just writing, and these guys actually have to go out and play a soccer game. And I just think that's really tough for them.
Okay.
You're like, you know what? You're a rookie. Take the extra peanuts. I don't need them. Take my Biscoffs. You want my Biscoffs?
Look, I'm a good guy.
Yeah, I'm a great guy.
So charter flights, I guess that would be kind of the next. Is that the thing that stands out first to you?
I think free agency is more important. No?
I mean, any player will tell you that just salary is probably, if that was the thing to prioritize, they would prioritize that. But they do seem to be talking more than ever before about charter flights. Yeah. They did get free agency, very limited free agency back 48. In 2015. Yeah, exactly. And I was surprised actually that they gave up salary stuff for the little bit of free agency, and I still wonder if that was a miscalculation at the time.
Okay.
I think salary is really important. We'll see about the charter flights. I mean, like, I also remember like when the Galaxy back in 07 finally did get a charter flight, Alan Gordon, in one of my favorite quotes of all time, said to the flight attendant, "This is nicer than my house." And she was like, ha ha ha. And he's like, "No, I'm serious."
I live here now.
Which is great. And also, Alan Gordon also posts quite salacious photos. You know,
the one of the.
I don't know if we can show it on television.
Well, I mean, it's my lock screen, so if you want me to hold my phone up, I will.
So we did get a question. So for the new viewers,
And that was Brendan Schechter who asked that question.
Brandon Schechter, thank you for Gully Squad. Gully Squad is like our hardcore, diehard kind of supporters.
There are ultras.
Our ultras, and they had a question for you. So Greg Jackson asked. He said, "What exactly did U.S. Soccer see Ernie Stewart do in his first year to already be promoted to sporting director, and who is in line to replace him as GM?"
Would you like us to get you some gasoline in a match and point you towards the bridge that you make a living on?
Here's what I would say, and I wrote this. So that, I mean, like, it's a little surprising to me because the public thing that we all saw Ernie Stewart do over the last year was this process to land on Greg Berhalter that took forever and ever and ever, even though he only really interviewed 1.5 candidates. And so,
who was the half?
I mean, Oscar Pereja supposedly.
Oh, that's right.
But you know, they didn't interview Tata Martino, who I think would have loved to have interviewed for that job.
You really think that?
Oh yeah.
What I mean that just makes
and
me
more and
angrier.
more now, like that gets people angry, especially given the results in the past week, but also that they've won like 11 straight with Mexico or something. Yeah. And so I think that's something that in any line of work, when you're interviewing someone for a job, you want to interview people. There's no punishment for interviewing people. And so like, I just don't understand why they didn't have more candidates that they looked at, they being Ernie Stewart. That was his job. And so that's confusing to me. Now, maybe inside U.S. Soccer, Ernie Stewart has done these revolutionary things that caused him to get this promotion, but nobody really knows what those things are. And so I think from a public perspective, I think he's a little under the gun to see good things happen with this U.S. men's program. And now he's actually in charge of the women's side, too, with this promotion, which I know not everyone on the women's side is totally comfortable with. They're like, oh, we hired Kate Markgraf as the first U.S. women's GM on the very same day. The bigger headline was U.S. Soccer promotes Ernie Stewart. Oh, yeah, he's going to be in charge of the world champion women. And what exactly has Ernie Stewart done?
Yeah. Right. Do you think that Tata's success should be the curve by which Berhalter and Ernie Stewart are graded? Because he would have had an opportunity to be the coach?
I think the U.S. and Mexico have achieved enough, both teams, in the last 20 years and are close enough rivals. And there have been moments, as you guys know, when the U.S. has been better than Mexico in the last 20 years, that I do think that should be part of how you're judged. You're judged in many ways by how your rival is doing and how you're doing compared to them. And right now, the U.S. isn't as good as Mexico, and it's not even that close.
Right. And when you mentioned that point about public perception, that he was under a little bit of pressure, I kind of disagree. Do you really think that I feel like in our soccer bubble, the people can get upset, but does U.S. soccer care about these diehard?
Give a shit. I think it's a term.
about
Grant?
about that kind of about that perception from just that bubble, because it seems like there's not enough people to get angry to force a change.
I think you're underestimating a little bit how big the fandom has grown for the U.S. men's national team out there on a regular basis, not just at World Cups.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously during a men's World Cup, you're going to have a lot more Americans following and having opinions and media and all of that stuff. But I actually think now, you know, you've got ESPN covering this team regularly. You've got Fox covering this team regularly. You've got a lot of written outlets covering this team regularly. And there's a lot of feeling out there. And so I think U.S. Soccer would be mistaken not to take seriously, you know, how the fan base feels. Does that mean everyone on soccer Twitter should be someone you freak out about? No.
Yes, you heard it here first from Grant Wahl.
He reads every tweet. He gets angry every time.
All right, let's go to break. We'll be right back and more, and we'll talk about your book when we get back.
So Grant, I wanted to make sure we talked about your book, Masters of Modern Soccer. I usually, most of the time, whenever we have authors on the show, I usually like to read their book beforehand so that they.
And I usually just like zone out when they're on, 'cause I'm like, what? Are we having smart people?
I can't give Alexis homework. Trust me. But please let us know a quick synopsis about the book.
Yeah, it's about the craft of soccer, position by position. And I learned a ton doing this book over 2 years.
So it's like the Karma Sutra of. I'm kidding.
Ooh, what position?
That would have been a nice sort of jacket quote from you to have on there. You know?
Yeah. Oh, wait till we get to the double pivot. I hope you stretch beforehand.
Okay, sorry, dude.
So basically, I wanted to find a goalkeeper. I got Manuel Neuer to spend time with me for 2 years, a defender, Vincent Kompany, a defensive midfielder, Xabi Alonso, an attacking midfielder, Christian Pulisic, a forward, Chicharito, a coach, Roberto Martinez, and a director of football, Michael Zorc from Dortmund, who are like pretty close to world class, all of them.
Yeah.
Or totally world class, World Cup winners and such.
Everyone except Chicharito, I think, right?
Well, really? Did you need to do that?
I mean, no, but yeah.
I love Chicharito. He's I
he's
actually
great.
just want to
And I
ask.
had a blast.
Yeah, he's especially the last I think it was like a year ago or 2 years ago. I watched a Instagram live that he did that totally changed my perception of him. Not that I had a negative one, but he was talking about misogyny and machismo in Mexico and in culture, about how it was like him and a friend and talking about how telling his fans like, hey, we gotta stop, we gotta chill out with all this stuff because women are being disrespected and stuff. I'm like, it's cool. He's already a great player, very outspoken, but for him to be specific about that, I was just like, oh, this guy's a great dude.
He's a really thoughtful guy. And the fact of the matter is, when you cover a sport for a long time, you realize 95, 98% of the athletes and coaches you cover aren't going to go into the media afterward because they're not always great at talking about in detail what it is they do or having insight about it. And so the whole point of this book was to pick people who have that ability, that rare ability to be extremely thoughtful about what they do on the field. And there's a reason why some of these guys have already worked in television, like Roberto Martinez, like Vincent Kompany, and any of these guys are capable of doing that, including Christian Pulisic, who I thought sort of held his own.
He kind of comes across a little bit like Messi does, like outside of the football field, the football pitch, soccer field, he seems uncomfortable. He seems a little awkward. Did you get that from him, or is he a bit more relaxed, a bit more maybe enigmatic than I think a lot of U.S. soccer fans give him credit for?
He's a guy who is much more insightful when he's doing a one-on-one interview than when he's in a group setting. Like when he's in a group media setting, a lot of times he goes on autopilot like so many athletes do and just kind of wants to get through it and doesn't really enjoy it. But I visited him where he was living in Dortmund, and he was still a teenager at the time. But with all of these guys, we watched a ton of video together, and I got the chance to ask him questions about what were you thinking here? What were your options?
I thought you meant Ariana Grande. You know? What are you guys into? Grant got it all. I got Spotify. We good.
And Pulisic was fantastic. He held his own in a chapter with Xabi Alonso, who's one of the smartest, most accomplished players ever, basically. And it hit me that Pulisic has this photographic memory. He could remember that, because we had this sort of sequential video that we were looking at. He remembered which game it was from. He remembered the circumstances in each, and really had a lot to say about what he was thinking and how he was approaching playing his position at that time.
Amazing. He has a photographic memory of every time the U.S. men's national team gave the ball away.
Yeah,
Which he probably does.
He must be tormented by Trinidad and Tobago then.
Just brutal.
Getting carried over the water. When you write a book like this, what is it that you're hoping to get across to the reader? What is it that they can expect besides these guys really know their sport?
The excitement that I had being in the room with Vincent Kompany at Manchester City when we're literally in the theater that the team sits in when they do scouting video stuff. And I have pictures of this, Vincent Kompany's like a teacher up at the screen, answering my questions. And that
was in the documentary, the Amazon show, that room, it was a little theater. Yeah.
And that is, for me, just an incredible opportunity to be there and listen to what he was saying. But I want to communicate the excitement that I was having and what he was sharing. and these guys ended up being so smart in their ability to talk about things that only they could have experienced and known. That's then my job as the writer to get in the book and have it be interesting and not dry like a textbook, which that was the whole idea.
So, I mean, but for you, you must be a geek. You must be losing your mind with getting this kind of, little Grant Wahl doesn't envision these things happening, right? Well, what is it like?
A kid asking Bob Bradley questions in college could not have imagined.
I probably wouldn't have imagined it, and there's just some really cool moments along the way. Like I had multiple interviews with each one of the people in this book, but like the one with Chicharito was when Osorio was still his coach, and I couldn't get Chicharito to agree to a second interview. Nice as he is, he doesn't do a ton of interviews. And so I go out to Denver, where the Mexican team is, and Osorio ends up arranging this 1.5 hour long conversation with Chicharito, and then Miguel Layún just shows up, and they have this great discussion in English, by the way, which I captured all of it, and it's all in the book, all the good stuff. And there, Osorio has all of these his whole tactical stuff that he puts out, on the table, and they actually go through all of these patterns about how they set up for particular games and how their team actually under Osorio, and this happens with some regularity, have specific patterns that they run to try and get Chicharito the ball. I was just fascinated by the whole thing.
Which chapter does Landon Donovan talk shit about Beckham?
That's in the new afterword for the paperback.
We'll be right back with more of Grant Wahl after this.
All right, well, Grant. Okay, look, now we have to talk about the Women's World Cup. You were there.
Right. Let's do it.
Sorry for being so aggressive when I just said your name. You were like,
yo, Grant.
Yo, Grant.
Yeah, you best be prepared. Buckle your seatbelt, my guy.
All right, you don't even know what you signed up for.
What do you think about this photo?
You were at the Women's World Cup, and I enjoyed your coverage, especially because the stuff that you did on the digital side, you would make these videos where you would kind of highlight a particular thing or a certain point. But your experience, watching you at the Women's World Cup, I felt a little bit of there was like this sympathy that you were delivering, I think, to the viewers, where there was like this understanding. This is my take. Yeah, I have not had this conversation before. I was just like, I get that I am a man here, and I'm going to try my best to have a nuanced and interesting take that is sensitive to people's ideals, or like equal pay. There were so many things sort of swirling around, and I felt like it was a very genuine and sincere delivery and take of your thoughts throughout the.
I do think the Women's World Cup, maybe more than the Men's World Cup even, though the Men's World Cup can do this too, becomes this place where you do get into discussion about off-the-field topics. And some of the things that came up during this Women's World Cup were things like, how do we talk about African soccer teams and black soccer players? Yeah. Because, it happened during this tournament, but it also happens every week around the world when people talk about pace and power with black soccer players and sort of act as if they don't have much in the way of technical skills or vision or what have you. And that's just obviously not possible if you're going to be a player at a high level.
The thing is, when people see me play, they don't mention my pace or power. I don't know why.
They do. They just said the word lack of in front of each.
Seems kind of disrespectful when they don't.
And I'm not black, but you should see when I'm at a pizza place, people are like, look at the pace, look at the power, So I do kind of get it. You know what I mean?
But
I enjoyed those types of things though, and so the ability to do an off-the-cuff sort of essay, video-wise, at the end of each match day was, sometimes I would talk about soccer. Like, here are 5 things I think FIFA should do for women's soccer. And interestingly, at the end of the tournament, the FIFA president announced basically 4.5 of my 5 things as his own.
Okay.
But
Oscar Pereira has that half yet again. He just keeps missing out.
Look, the U.S. soccer CEO position is vacant. We have.
Okay, you never know.
So, that type of thing was fun for me. And they got good engagement, more than 250,000 views on some of these things.
Yeah.
And just that ability to talk about politics in soccer and how I don't think you can separate politics in sports or soccer, especially in the year 2019. And if you try, I think you're just putting your head in the sand. So, the ability to put those things out there and was a nice thing to be able to do and to get the response that it got.
Speaking of politics in soccer, we're seeing sort of a bit of a shift change where some of the, especially in the women's team, the players are really standing up for themselves and for what they believe in this case, equal pay. And as much as a lot was sort of the fanfare was made over what Carlos Cordero said at the parade.
Megan Rapinoe?
Rapinoe, he's like, give it up for Alex Morgano. We're so close, dude. All of a sudden, news breaks that they've hired 2 lobbyist groups or firms to convince lawmakers or politicians that no, they've been getting paid even more than you think. How does that come across to you, and how does that come across to, how do you get that out to the fans without sort of being like, what the hell, because we could go, what the,
I mean, tone deaf is the word I would use, and that's the word I have used. I mean, I don't think U.S. Soccer understands the public and the people that in Washington they were speaking to, the lawmakers, even presidential candidates they hired these lobbyists to speak to, who their response was, maybe you should save the money that you're using to hire these lobbyists and pay the players.
Yeah, which is so obvious. Even the lawmakers, the people you paid someone to convince are like, what are you doing?
I don't want your money.
This is stupid.
Washington's totally dysfunctional, but even they get it,
This is too corrupt for me. I'm sorry.
I have some standards. They're just a body in a rolled up rug leaving behind that person. When you view these things, like, do you want to go back to those segments and be like, all right, we got one for you? Do you want to be able to sort of take these moments to just be like, I want to smack some of these people around just verbally,
I mean, I would have loved to have heard, gotten audio of, the lobbyists trying to convince,
that would have been
Kamala Harris or something like, oh, yeah, actually, we pay the women more than the guys, like what her response or her people's response would have been. But, it's that part of it just is tone deaf.
But isn't it? I hear U.S. Soccer is a nonprofit, and the mission statement is to help grow the game and make it the most popular sport in the country. But when you see decisions like these, it's like, well, why deviate from that message? So it's easy to just kind of accuse them of being selfish or thinking of only of themselves.
I mean, the biggest question for me is Cindy Parlow-Cone, former World Cup winner, is currently the vice president of U.S. Soccer. What does she think about how this equal pay discussion is going and how U.S. Soccer is handling it? What did the members of...
I have a quote from her. She said, shit, I don't care. I got my money. So I thought that was amazing that that's a quote. Right on my screen. It's on my screen. You can't see it. It's on my screen.
You typed it in Microsoft Word.
I know. A lot of red lines.
What does the Athlete Council, which actually provided the winning margin for Carlos Cordero to become the U.S. Soccer president, what are these Athlete Council members who include Alex Morgan now, Landon Donovan, what do they all think about how Cordero and U.S. Soccer are handling this?
Yeah, why is it so vague, though?
There's no transparency whatsoever.
There really isn't.
Other than this quote. I mean, we don't get anything that's official.
Incredible that Cindy was so sincere.
It's very open. Everyone else, a little tight.
But why?
Grant, official word, Grant.
It's just, but I mean, you must get frustrated from time to time with just seeing how unclear some of these decisions are. When I had never watched a U.S. Soccer president election,
we were riveted.
I'm watching it, and I was live tweeting it, and I'm like, how come nobody else is enthralled like I am?
It's a soap opera.
Why did the Athletes Council? We had spoken to Carl Martino, and he was he wasn't direct about while he was running. He was like, there are some people, some former players that I won't
never
speak
talk
to
again
anymore. And clearly, something happened, but nobody wants to talk about it.
Grant's eyes just made a move where I know he knows who he's talking about.
I do know where some of the bodies are buried. I mean, in covering
Let's get some shots for Grant.
This actually was when the U.S. failed to qualify for the World Cup. That was a gigantic story, obviously one of the biggest stories in the history of U.S. soccer. And then when you had 8 candidates for U.S. soccer president, I decided, like, look, I'm going to try and cover this as well as I can. I'm going to, on my podcast, try to interview every single candidate. I ended up getting everyone except Hope Solo, unfortunately, but I got everyone else. And I'm going to do stories to try and get a sense of what is actually happening behind the scenes here. And one thing that was kind of nice, or not, for me at least, I think as a journalist, a working journalist, was every one of those candidates was upset with me at some point in the campaign. And yet 7 of the 8 still did the podcast interview. And it was just new to me as well. I'd never covered a U.S. soccer presidential election before, much less one with 8 candidates. And so to see some of the things that were happening behind the scenes as people like Sunil Gulati were trying to get people who had supported him in the past to support Kathy Carter. I remember, interviewing this head of a New York State Youth Soccer Association, this older dude who said he was going to support Kathy Carter, but he called her the girl 11 times in the interview and didn't mention her name even once.
Just progressive for New Jersey. let's not take away. We'll be right back with more Ground. We were talking about that crazy election. I still feel like Catherine Carter was a bit of a Manchurian candidate, okay? Trying to get our eyes, averted while Carlos Cordero came in and just, stole the position. But clearly there's a lot to cover there. We could go over that another time, maybe over drinks.
That was a big statement. You said a lot of things.
It was a hell of a sentence.
By the way, guys, Julie Stewart-Binks has a show that's also on this channel.
That's right.
I hadn't heard.
I noticed that they're allowing them to drink on one of the shows. Where are the drinks here?
Yeah, ours, we'll do it. We're going to bring out some Latino drinks, some coquito.
Also, Alexis is already drunk.
Yeah, dude. Wait, you haven't been drinking this whole time, Grant?
Haven't you noticed? Wow.
When Julie starts her show, she's like, what happened to all the drinks? I'm like, hey, yeah, what happened to them? I thought that was more. Clearly, look, American soccer is changing. There's so many things that are happening. Transparency is starting to become a bit more. MLS is also sort of now in this mode where it really can't keep hold of all of the, the secrets it used to. Like, a lot of this stuff is coming out. It just seems like we're in a rush of expansion. Like, where do you think this ends? Do you think we're going to go to 34? Do you think it's ever going to be 2 different leagues?
I mean, I think you've heard actually on occasion some of the owners in the league say they could see it being as big as 40 teams. If that were the case, then that's 2 leagues. That's like an MLS 1 and an MLS 2.
Yeah.
Potentially with movement in between those leagues.
Ooh, word movement.
Promotion and relegation.
Trolls away. Huh? All the tinfoil hats not here. We said movement.
He's one of us.
That was your little QAnon thing. You gave him a little.
But I mean, also too, I don't think the league wants to say that necessarily publicly because they want to keep people thinking who are bidding for these teams that this could stop at 30. I just don't see that. Yeah, I just don't see that happening, though. I mean, as long as you're getting $200 million is the current expansion fee price, which is crazy compared to in 2007, it was like $10 million or something like that.
What about single entity? Do you think that structure starts to fall apart? It seems like this CBA is going to be chipping away at it even more than free agency did.
Given that some owners do want to spend more money.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't necessarily see single entity going away, though I could see the salary cap going much, much higher. I certainly hope that's the case. Yeah. I don't think maybe this CBA cycle we're going to see a huge jump. But, I mean, if we all want to see MLS someday, maybe within our lifetimes, you guys are younger than me, be like the best league in the world or one of the best leagues, that salary cap's got to go a lot higher.
Yeah. It's like it's like trying to figure out what MLS should look like. I mean, what we don't know. When we started the show, we did not think MLS. It's just 4 years, and we didn't think MLS would be where it is. Speaking of the expansion fees and this many teams, and it just seems like it is the 2-league system seems to make the most sense. I mean, it seems like when we started the show, we thought, and we had gone to press conferences and saw Don Garber speak at the state of MLS and everything. He would just stop with I think he wanted to smack journalists with all these questions about the future of promotion relegation. And now it seems like with especially the addition I
Well,
feel
they
like
already become a selling league. So like now, like that happened, and that was 4 years ago. Would have never been admitted to. So I feel like these walls are starting to crumble a little bit.
Yeah, for me the big thing.
Walls.
Yeah, you
Like
get it.
Grant. Bad.
For me, the big thing is that like there's been so much of a focus on money and financial issues, and not enough on the soccer in maybe the last several years. That like, okay, the money side, financial side seems to be doing much better for MLS. Let's make sure that the soccer side is truly getting better too, and that applies to the national team, I think, as well. It's not just about the money; it's about being a good soccer country. How do we get there on the soccer side?
And one thing people often suggest when it comes to raising the quality of the game is adding diversity to American soccer, and not necessarily in just the like who makes it into an international squad or at the youth levels, because it seems to be pretty diverse there. But in coaching, there seems to be a complete lack of Latino coaches, black coaches.
U.S. Soccer, they just have that sort of like that big group, and there was not one Latino male in the whole thing.
Right.
I mean, what's going on? Do Christian and I have to now take on roles? We will.
We will.
And it will become very much a for-profit organization.
I mean, I just think it's really unfortunate that Tab Ramos is the only Latino coach in U.S. soccer right now, and he's basically being pushed aside when it comes to strategy on the youth side, even though this is a guy who's gotten to 3 straight under-20 World Cup quarterfinals. I think it's unfortunate that Robin Fraser just got hired as the Colorado Rapids coach, as the first black head coach since Patrick Vieira, and they are 2 of the only black head coaches we've seen in this league for years and years and years. So, I mean, it's a real issue. I'd like to think that MLS and U.S. Soccer were doing more to try and find minority coaches, head coaches. I don't feel like they really are. And I want soccer in this country to reflect what this country is.
Yeah. So give us jobs, dude. Yeah, Grant, give us jobs. Where could the fans follow you? Where could they see your stuff? Because you're all over the place.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Grant Wahl, but also for Sports Illustrated, I host a weekly video show called Planet Football. We've done 85 episodes. It's free now. It's not behind the paywall, so we get good guests. This week we'll have Jesse Marsch coming on to talk about not our days in college, but about coaching in the Champions League.
Is it all cleared up down there?
Glad we sorted that out. Yeah.
And we're really enjoying it. My co-host is Luis Miguel Echegaray, and it's something that has been a lot of fun. I host a weekly podcast, Planet Football Podcast. I do a lot of writing. Might even start another book project soon.
Damn, so much. Well, we'll be right back with more after this.
Well, thank you, Grant Wahl, for joining.
Thanks for having me.
First guest on our show. Thank you so much.
Absolute honor. I would shake your hand, but
I'll shake it for you.
all right.
Congratulations. We had a guest on.
So, Grant, again, Grant's book, Masters of Modern Soccer, make sure you pick it up. I'm sure you can pick it up everywhere books are sold.
Fine books are sold.
Okay, so make sure you do that. So this has been the wrap-up of our second show.
Second show
With
ever.
our first guest, Grant, an absolute honor. How'd you feel, Alexis?
I feel comfortable. I feel like maybe you set up a couple cots. Maybe, I could just live in this studio. This would be nice.
Okay.
Julie comes on. I awake a little bit, take a little shot, go back.
I think Alexis is trying to plan things for when his wife kicks him out.
Yeah, always happening soon. Yeah, she's already sizing up the window to see what of mine she could throw out. But this has been an absolute blast. Why don't we go ahead? Why don't we get Grant in on the exit? Huh?
Yeah, that will be nice. So
Yeah.
make sure to do that. Okay, so with that said, for Grant Wahl, my name is Christian Polanco.
I'm Alexis Guerreros, and together, what are we?
The Cooligans!